this Easter morn.
What Jesus came was to make more personal the spiritual life, hopeful for the future. Easter is a celebration of life.
Vanish forever in our souls, thy light we see.
Good morning and a happy Easter to everyone. Easter is, of course, a happy occasion which allows me the occasion to share some happiness. As well as hopefully some inspiration. I've often, over the many years, I've had the opportunity to share these teachings, to share a little bit of a lively, humorous story once in a while, but I have never in my life ever read such a thing, but today is a first. Because I can't keep all these churches quite straight, so listen up. There was once in a Midwest town an invasion of squirrels to all the different churches. And here's how they responded. The Presbyterian church called a meeting, what to do with the squirrel infestation. After much prayer and consideration, they concluded that the squirrels were predestined to live there, and they should not interfere. But at the Baptist church, the squirrels had taken an interest in the baptistry. The deacons met and decided to put a water slide in the baptistry and let the squirrels drown themselves. But the squirrels liked the slide and unfortunately knew how to swim, so twice as many squirrels showed up the next week. The Lutheran church decided that they were not in any position to harm God's creatures, so they humanely trapped the squirrels and set them free near the Baptist church. 2 weeks later, the squirrels were back when the Baptists took down the water slide. The Episcopalians tried a much more unique path. They put out pans of whiskey around their church in an effort to kill the squirrels with alcohol poisoning. They sadly learned how much damage a band of drunk squirrels can do. But the Catholic Church came up with a more creative strategy. They baptized all the squirrels and made them members of the church, and now they only come on Easter. For those of you pagans and heathens who don't know, when I grew up as a Catholic church, it was a mortal sin. You go to hell if you didn't show up on Easter. So Easter was very well attended. So, okay, well, I'd like to read another verse. I don't often read things. From Yogananda's magazine in 1935. At that time, he called his magazine Inner Culture. But I was so struck with the sweetness and poetry of this, I wanted to read it first also. The little wavelet of Christ's life played helpfully over the bosom of the cosmic life for a while, and then it vanished within the ocean's tenderness, not to die, but to be fed with eternal ambrosia, and to come back again to declare the immortality of its tiny existence. The ocean of God throbbed once more in the resurrected Prince Jesus. Flowers fade, never to return, but Jesus only slept to obey the sweet command of nature and woke again to declare his mastery over her. Declare the immortality of its tiny existence. The ocean of God throbbed once more in the resurrected Prince Jesus. Flowers fade, never to return, but Jesus only slept to obey the sweet command of nature and woke again to declare his mastery over her. This week, what came to me, and every week I do a little blog article that's in our weekly email, but of course I know nobody read it, so I'm safe to bring it up. And do a little video to accompany it for those who prefer that form. But what occurred to me is a theme that we see a lot in different people's interpretation of the life of Jesus, which is to say that surely he was a revolutionary. Well, I don't think the Romans, Pontius Pilate, was all that threatened by Jesus as a revolutionary particularly, but he had to do his duty when Jesus was accused of being such. Okay. The religious authorities there in Jerusalem saw Jesus as revolutionary in terms of, all the things that he did and said that basically didn't vibe with them particularly. But that wasn't really how he was a revolutionary. Jesus said he came to fulfill the law and the prophets, not to overturn them. And yet, from the perspective of 2,000 years, we can look back and say, well, if he didn't overturn them, I don't know what he did, but he created a whole new thing. Even in his life, he broke the laws of the Sabbath, and he enraged the religious authorities. And his apostles, his close disciples, just threw the baby out with the bathwater. They even got rid of circumcision, which, by the way, was a pretty smart thing to do if this thing was going to grow. But the point is, he was a revolutionary, but not even in this fact. The way in which he was a revolutionary was much more of an inner experience. When you think of the history of Judaism prior to him and the coming of the different prophets, all of whom were more or less rejected one way or the other, at least as I understand it. But what Jesus brought was something very personal. You know, I often hear from time to time this phrase, do you accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? And I sort of shudder when I hear that. But you know, the tradition and teachings from India, though they don't use that expression, it's really no different. What Jesus came was to make more personal the spiritual life of people. The Jews had their laws, good as far as they went, but the law simply isn't enough. How can you love a God you've never met? And so it is that the teaching of the need of the individual soul for an individual savior, or guru, as we would say in the Eastern tradition, and I don't mean just a spiritual teacher as a guru, I mean a true avatar, an enlightened soul. That teaching is really what I believe unites the teachings of India, Sanatana Dharma, with the teachings of Jesus. Yogananda was asked, I suspect more than once, but I only know of one incidents in which he was asked, why do you put so much emphasis on the teachings of Jesus and those of Krishna? I mean, there's lots of other great avatars down through the ages, Rama and Buddha and on in that way. All he would say is that it was Babaji's wish that he do so. But there's a story there, and truthfully, he didn't tell the story. As I think Sri Yukteswar's guru once said, you will know when you will know. Save some questions for when you meet the Creator to answer them. All that to say is that there is a deep link between the life and teachings and the spiritual vibration of Jesus and that of Yogananda and his lineage. Each week in our Festival of Light ceremony, we restate the teaching Yogananda gave that it was Jesus who appeared to Babaji and asked him to send to the West, and send to the world really, someone who would resurrect the practice, basically, of meditation. You know, Jesus' teachings were very simple. And in that fact alone, it was a new covenant. He only gave one ritual and one prayer, the ritual of the breaking of bread and the drinking of wine. In other words, partaking in a feast is what we're going to do today. It's what everybody does in the name of spirit throughout the world, is to partake and commune with nature in different forms. Food is the most obvious form by which we ingest and digest the living prana, the living spirit, the living energy of the natural world. It's very personal. Now, what Jesus also did, however, by his crucifixion, that and that alone has caused perhaps the greatest amount of challenge. Yogananda would say to audiences, and it's just amazing to me that he could say this and get away with it, but he would say, Jesus Christ was crucified once, but his teachings have been crucified daily ever since. And this whole idea of suffering, well, there is suffering in the world, isn't there? Whether it's in our own way or whether on some grander scale through war and pestilence and innumerable other forms, is simply a fact of life. Buddha, as we know, sought to seek the solution to suffering. And the great teachings of throughout the world, really, Jesus Christ said, kingdom of heaven is within you, is to reach for, to go within and seek the transcendent state. I've been listening recently, I've been sharing with Morley here, been listening to the series on the great epic of humanity, of India, the epic of the Mahabharata, the longest epic in the world. And this one fellow, who I don't know who he is or what he is, but he's done about 75 20-minute stories, and the telling of the Mahabharata. And there we have really just as Jesus' crucifixion is very dramatic in the lives of avatars as we know them, but so too was this great battle, which apparently was an actual battle, and there's an actual battlefield in North India where you can go. In any case, it's very dramatic. And what it shows us, I mean, think of Jesus. He, right before his being arrested, etc., he whipped the money changers in the temple. The issue of money and power at the heart and the basis of religion has been a plague on humanity, East and West, but particularly in the West, where our own kind of genius happens to revolve around the Roman institution of organization, is exactly, in fact, what happened. He tried to give the example that the two shouldn't coexist, but we know the rest of the story. And so this whole question of suffering, okay, it exists. Jesus gave us a beautiful example. Yogananda said that the greatest miracle Jesus ever showed was not his resurrection. Yogananda, whose teachings we practice, his own guru, Sri Yukteswar, appeared to him 3 months after his death in 1936 in a hotel in Bombay, Mumbai. Sri Yukteswar manifested his physical form right before Yogananda. The testimony of such, quote, miracles is not unique to Jesus at all. His greatest miracle was to forgive people, even while on the cross. His greatest sacrifice, in effect, was to allow himself to be uncoupled, if you will, from the presence of the Father while on the cross, and crying out for that Spirit to be revealed again as it otherwise always was. The greatest miracle was to accept the test that he was given. Though he was very willing, he prayed in the garden to, if you want this to pass, I'm all for it. But he accepted the divine will. Unfortunately, two things came out of that miracle, that very dramatic life of an avatar. One is the emphasis on suffering, and the other is the emphasis on the resurrection of the body, representative of the ego. Those are unfortunate interpretations of the meaning of the life of Jesus Christ, really of all the avatars, which teach us to seek transcendence, but not to run away. In former times, people would run away to caves or hermitages or monasteries. We here today have the spiritual mission from within ourselves to be in the world, but not of the world. To bring spirit to work, to bring spirit to life. But how? How can we possibly avoid the delusion of the duality which is offered to us in this day? It's simple. What is sweeping the world, which is what Yogananda and others have brought from the East, is the inner life, the inner communion rite, if you will, of meditation. The resurrection of Jesus has to do with the promise of our own redemption. Redemption of what? And the emphasis furthermore on heaven and hell is again the wrong emphasis, at least it is for us. You don't have to go very far on this planet to find heaven or hell. And in any case, it exists within ourselves. This is the new dispensation. As Jesus brought a new covenant, and essentially, even as he claimed to fulfill it, which he did, nonetheless, in its outward form, wiped the slate clean. So too, what this world needs is the same new covenant. Well, not the same new covenant, but a new dispensation, as Yogananda called it. He refused to say whether or not he was a reincarnation of Jesus Christ. In fact, he said with some disdain, what difference would it make? As I've said before, it'd make a big difference to me, but I understand. It's not the point. Because the how would you put it? The worship of Jesus Christ as the only Son of God is one of the gravest misunderstandings. It worked for 2,000 years. There was no competition, if you don't mind my putting it that way. But in the world we live in, when all the different faith traditions come and live together, work together, etc., and when we have such a dire need for respect, compromise, cooperation, and shared understanding, a new dispensation of wisdom and love is needed. Science is showing us the way, at least in its own territory, of showing us how we're all interconnected in a material way and so on. That's a nice way to start, but that's not enough. We need the actual realization of our connection with all life and with one another in order to ford the rivers, the raging rivers of our differences, our upbringing and our prejudices and all of those kinds of things that are necessary in a world of 8 billion people all living and working together. I don't think even we who consider ourselves disciples of Yogananda Ji and his lineage, I don't think even we can really appreciate what is taking place in the world. I think we can appreciate the risks that are happening in this world, the degree to which we are on the edge of our own existence, I think. You know, I've been something of a student of history, and I think with some sadness that the destruction of Jerusalem and in fact the enslavement of thousands of Jews in 70 AD, and how Jesus stood there when his disciples turned to him to turn around as they were leaving Jerusalem and said, "Look at this beautiful temple." Well, Jesus turned around and he didn't see the temple. He saw its destruction. And sometimes it's fun to play a what-if game, and I've thought, and I'm not alone in this, what if Jesus had not been so completely rejected? Would the rebelliousness, in other words, would the expectation and the desire for a political or a kingly or a military type Messiah, if that could have been redirected, would that immense destruction not have happened? I suspect so, and I'm not the first. In any case, we can't change that. But what about us? If we consider possibly, as we maybe read or maybe don't read, but you can't help but see the headlines, what this world faces, maybe there's a what if here too. I think in this case, because this lineage teaches, unlike the orthodoxy of India, And unlike the fundamentalists in the other faith traditions, this lineage teaches that we are on, admittedly, a little slow for some of us, but we are on upwelling of awareness, intelligence, and even virtue, although it doesn't seem that way most days, but nonetheless. And I think the what if will play out perhaps a little differently than it did in those times. Doesn't mean that there won't be challenges. Yogananda said as much. But I'm hopeful for the future. Easter is a celebration of life. And life persists, as Gandhi put it, amidst destruction and darkness. And those who have an inner life, those who sit and close our eyes daily in meditation and offer our heart's longings, good, bad, or indifferent, whatever they are, up for purification, as we do every Sunday morning in the beautiful purification ceremony. Those of us who try to attune ourselves to the soul's promptings, the whispers from eternity, as to how we should live and act. And those souls which seek the transcendent state, the state which goes beyond the body, the personality, the likes and the dislikes, and the karma. Such souls are needed, like Krishna's warriors in the Kurukshetra, like all those, like those apostles and those thousands of people in the early centuries of Christianity who gave their life to render testimony. That may not be what's being asked, I suspect, but to give our life to God and Guru. A blessed and happy Easter to all.